I'm Ezra, 32, and everything changed when my wife's designer purse hit the courtroom wall after her lawyer told her my Tesla stock was worth $18 million. The sound of the $4,000 Hermes bag crashing against the mahogany paneling still echoes in my mind, followed by Jules's shriek of disbelief and her attorney Camilla Hyde's stammering apology. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry, but the post-marriage Tesla stock grants are considered marital assets," Camilla had said, her voice barely above a whisper as she reviewed the financial documents my lawyer Nico Tran had submitted. Jules had been so confident walking into that courtroom, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her designer bag, whispering to Camilla about how the prenup would protect everything she'd worked for during our marriage. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and join me as I share how a piece of paper I signed in love became the very thing that saved me from losing everything I'd actually earned. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same woman who had mocked my boring tech job for 5 years was now discovering that my boring tech job had made me worth more than she'd ever imagined. Jules had built her entire identity around being a lifestyle influencer, documenting our supposedly perfect marriage for her 400,000 Instagram followers, posting carefully curated photos of our home, our vacations, our anniversary dinners. What her followers didn't see were the credit card statements that made my stomach turn, the $3,000 monthly spa treatments, the shopping sprees that cost more than most people's rent, all justified because she was building her brand and investing in content creation. She had convinced me that her spending was necessary for her business, that the designer clothes and expensive treatments were tax-deductible business expenses, even though her influencer income barely covered a fraction of what she spent each month. I had joined Tesla in 2018 as a software engineer, back when the company was still struggling to meet production deadlines, and Elon was sleeping on the factory floor. The stock options seemed almost worthless then, trading around $60 per share, and I remember Jules laughing when I explained how employee stock purchase plans worked. "So you're basically gambling your paycheck on a car company that can't even make cars on time," she had said, rolling her eyes as she unboxed another package from Saks Fifth Avenue. The early years at Tesla were brutal, with 80-hour work weeks and constant pressure to deliver, but I believed in what we were building. Jules saw it differently, often complaining to her friends about how I was never home, how my work consumed my life, how she felt like a Tesla widow, married to someone who cared more about electric vehicles than his own wife. During our courtship and early marriage, Jules had been different, or maybe I had been too naive to see the signs. She had been a struggling lifestyle blogger then, working part-time at a boutique while trying to build her online presence. I found her ambition attractive, the way she talked about creating content and connecting with her audience. She had maybe 15,000 followers when we met, and I genuinely wanted to support her dreams. When we got engaged in 2019, she insisted on hiring the most expensive wedding photographer in the city because the content would be invaluable for her brand. The wedding cost $80,000, mostly funded by my signing bonus from Tesla, but Jules assured me it was an investment in our future, that the professional photos and videos would help her grow her following and eventually lead to brand partnerships. The prenup had been Jules's idea, presented to me 3 weeks before our wedding during what I thought was going to be a romantic dinner. "I know this might seem unromantic," she had said, sliding the documents across the table between our appetizers, "but I want to protect what we both bring into this marriage." At the time, she had more liquid assets than I did, having inherited $200,000 from her grandmother, while my net worth was tied up in unvested stock options that might never amount to anything. Camilla Hyde, who was a friend of Jules's family, had drafted the agreement, and I remember feeling pressured to sign quickly because our wedding was so close, and deposits had already been paid. Jules cried when I hesitated, asking if I didn't trust her, if I thought our marriage was going to fail, why I was being so difficult about something that was just protecting both of us. My sister Mira had warned me about the prenup, suggesting I have my own lawyer review it, but I was so worried about upsetting Jules that I signed it without independent counsel. "She's asking you to sign away rights to anything you earned during the marriage," Mira had said during a tense family dinner. "That's not normal, Ezra. Most prenups protect premarital assets, not everything you might build together." But Jules had already booked our honeymoon, already sent out wedding invitations, already arranged for a professional videographer to document our love story for her social media channels. I convinced myself that Mira was being overprotective, that she didn't understand how much Jules and I loved each other, that the prenup was just a formality that would never matter because we were going to be together forever. The Tesla stock grants had vested gradually over 4 years, with major chunks becoming available each anniversary of my start date. Jewel paid attention to these dates initially, often joking about planning vacations around my Tesla Christmas when new shares would vest. But as the stock price began its meteoric rise from $60 to $200, then $400, then splitting and rising again, Jules seemed to lose track of the actual numbers. She was more focused on her follower count, which had grown to nearly 500,000 by 2023, and the brand partnerships that were finally bringing in significant income. Her success had made her more confident, more demanding, and increasingly critical of my appearance in her content. "You need to dress better if you're going to be in my posts," she would say, buying me expensive clothes that made me uncomfortable, styling my hair in ways that didn't feel like me. By early 2024, I realized that our marriage had become a performance, with me playing the role of the supportive tech husband in Jules's carefully crafted narrative. She scheduled our date nights around optimal posting times, chose restaurants based on their Instagram worthiness rather than the food, and often spent more time capturing content than actually enjoying our experiences together. When I tried to talk to her about feeling disconnected, about missing the intimacy we used to share, she accused me of not supporting her career, of not understanding how hard she worked to maintain her online presence. The conversations always ended with her crying, saying I didn't appreciate everything she did for us, everything she sacrificed to build her brand while supporting my unstable startup job. The first sign that something fundamental had shifted in our marriage came in March 2024, when my annual Tesla stock vesting hit, and I casually mentioned that the shares were now worth more than Jules's entire annual influencer income. She had been editing photos from our weekend in Napa, carefully curating the perfect grid layout for her Instagram, when I showed her the Schwab notification on my phone. "Wait, those boring stock things are worth what now?" she asked, suddenly giving me her full attention for the first time in weeks. When I explained that my total Tesla holdings had grown to nearly $8 million, her expression changed in a way that made me uncomfortable, like she was seeing me differently, calculating something I couldn't quite understand. That revelation seemed to flip a switch in Jules's behavior toward money and our lifestyle. Within weeks, she had upgraded her car lease from a BMW to a Maserati, justifying it as content creation equipment, since she frequently posted driving videos and car selfies. The monthly payment was $1,800, nearly triple what she had been paying before. But when I questioned the expense, she reminded me that my Tesla stock had just made us practically millionaires. She started shopping at different stores, replacing her Zara and Nordstrom hauls with pieces from Gucci and Balenciaga, documenting her investment pieces for her followers while casually mentioning that her husband worked in tech. The comments on her posts began changing too, with followers asking about her sudden lifestyle upgrade and whether she had landed a major brand deal. Jules's content strategy evolved to showcase our supposedly luxurious lifestyle, but most of the luxury was funded by my Tesla income, while being presented as the fruits of her influencer success. She hired a professional photographer for $3,000 monthly retainer to shoot her lifestyle content, which often meant staging elaborate scenes in our home or expensive locations around the city. Our grocery budget tripled as she insisted on organic everything, not for health reasons, but because the expensive brands looked better in her healthy living posts. She started a morning routine series that required $400 worth of skincare products, a $1,200 silk robe, and specific lighting equipment that cost more than most people's rent. The most telling change was how Jules began introducing me to her influencer friends and their partners. At networking events and brand parties, she would describe my job in vague terms, saying I worked in tech innovation or sustainable technology, never mentioning Tesla specifically until someone pressed for details. Then she would casually drop that I had been an early employee and let people draw their own conclusions about what that meant financially. I noticed how other influencers' boyfriends and husbands seemed to orbit around their partners' careers, supporting their content creation, carrying their equipment, staying mostly silent during conversations about brand partnerships and collaboration strategy. During this period, Jules's friend Delilah Knox became a constant presence in our lives, often staying over for content planning sessions that involved expensive wine and increasingly critical discussions about their respective relationships. Delilah had recently gone through a messy breakup with a hedge fund manager, and she seemed to encourage Jules's newfound focus on financial security and lifestyle elevation. "You're finally living up to your potential," I overheard Delilah telling Jules one evening. "You deserve someone who can provide the life you've worked so hard to build." The way they both looked at me during these conversations made me feel like an accessory in my own marriage, valued more for what I could provide than who I was. The pressure to maintain Jules's elevated lifestyle began affecting my work performance and personal well-being. She expected me to be available for content shoots and events, often scheduling things during my work hours without consulting me first. When I explained that I couldn't leave in the middle of important meetings for a golden hour couples shoot, she accused me of not prioritizing our relationship, of being selfish about my time when she was working so hard to build something for both of us. The Tesla stock continued rising throughout 2024, reaching levels that seemed almost surreal. But instead of feeling grateful or excited, I felt trapped by Jules's increasing expectations and demands. Our intimate relationship suffered as everything became content for Jules's platform. She installed ring lights in our bedroom for morning routine posts, scheduled our date nights around her posting calendar, and often interrupted romantic moments to capture the perfect candid photo. Sex became performative, with Jules frequently stopping to take pictures of our supposedly spontaneous moments together. She started a couples series called Love in Tech that required me to participate in staged conversations about work-life balance and supporting your partner's dreams, even though we never had those conversations authentically anymore. The breaking point came during our 4th wedding anniversary in September 2024, when Jules planned an elaborate celebration at a $500 per person restaurant, inviting her photographer to document the entire evening. She had scripted talking points for me about how proud I was of her success, how supportive she had been during my startup years, and how excited we were about our future together. Sitting across from her at that expensive table, watching her perform gratitude and love for an audience that existed only on her phone, I realized that our marriage had become another piece of content, another performance in Jules' carefully curated online persona. The Tesla stock vesting in October brought our total holdings to over $12 million, and Jules' reaction was immediate and telling. She started researching houses in more expensive neighborhoods, looking at properties that cost $3 to $4 million, explaining that we needed more space for her content creation and that a luxury home would be a good investment. She also began hinting about starting a family, but only in the context of mommy influencer content and the potential for growing her audience through pregnancy and parenting posts. The way she discussed having children felt transactional, focused on content opportunities rather than genuine desire for parenthood. By November, I noticed Jules spending increasing amounts of time on her phone during our conversations, texting with someone she claimed was a potential brand partner. She became secretive about her meetings and collaborations, often leaving the house for hours without explanation, returning with new expensive items she claimed were gifted by brands. Her posting schedule became erratic, with fewer couples photos and more solo content showcasing her individual lifestyle and achievements. When I asked about the change in her content strategy, she said she was evolving her brand and focusing on female empowerment and independence. The first concrete sign of betrayal came through technology, ironically the same innovation that had built our wealth. Jules had forgotten that our Apple Watches were synced, and during a December morning when she was supposedly at a yoga class, I received notifications of text messages filled with heart emojis and intimate language that were clearly not meant for me. The sender was listed as LP in her contacts, and the messages were arriving while her location showed she was at the Ritz-Carlton downtown, nowhere near any yoga studio. When she returned home that afternoon, glowing and relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months, I said nothing, but something fundamental shifted in how I viewed our relationship and our future together. The discovery of Jules' affair hit me like a physical blow, but what hurt more was the methodical way she had been planning her exit strategy, while I remained completely oblivious to her deception. Over the following weeks, I began paying attention to details I had previously ignored, and the pattern that emerged was both calculating and cruel. Jules had been meeting with Lachlan Pierce, an investment banker she claimed to have met through a brand collaboration for over 3 months. Their relationship had progressed from professional consultation about financial investments to intimate dinners at expensive restaurants that Jules documented as business meetings on her social media. The messages I had accidentally seen were just the beginning. Once I knew what to look for, the evidence was everywhere. Jules's sudden interest in learning about investment portfolios wasn't academic curiosity. It was Lachlan educating her about asset protection and wealth management. Her new workout routine that required her to be gone for 3-hour stretches wasn't about fitness. It was about spending time at Lachlan's downtown penthouse apartment. The expensive lingerie purchases she claimed were for confidence and self-care content were never featured in any of her posts because they were being worn for someone else entirely. What made the betrayal even more devastating was how Jules continued performing the role of loving wife while actively planning to leave me. She maintained her couple's content on Instagram, posting anniversary tributes and Valentine's Day declarations that thousands of people liked and commented on, calling us relationship goals and asking for advice about finding love like ours. Behind the scenes, she was consulting with divorce attorneys and researching California community property laws, specifically focusing on how prenuptial agreements could protect assets acquired during marriage. I found browser history on our shared laptop showing searches for Tesla stock divorce settlement and challenging prenup validity. My sister Mira had warned me about the prenup from the beginning, but her concerns went deeper than just the legal implications. Jules asked you to sign that prenup right after Tesla went public, Mira reminded me during a tense phone conversation after I finally confided in her about my discoveries. She saw the potential of your stock options before you did, and she made sure she would be protected if things went south. That's not love, Ezra, that's strategy. Mira had never liked Jules, finding her superficial and manipulative, but I had always dismissed my sister's concerns as jealousy or misunderstanding. Now, looking back at the timeline, I realized that Jules's sudden interest in marriage had coincided perfectly with Tesla's stock reaching $400 per share. The prenup itself was a masterpiece of one-sided protection, drafted by Camilla Hyde with surgical precision to ensure that Jules would retain everything she brought into the marriage while having no claim to anything I earned during our union. At the time, this seemed fair since Jules had more liquid assets than I did, and I genuinely believed we were building a life together where individual ownership didn't matter. The document specified that any income, investments, or assets acquired by either party during the marriage would remain separate property, with no community property rights. What I hadn't understood was that this clause worked entirely in Jules's favor, since my Tesla stock was appreciating exponentially while her influencer income remained relatively modest. Camilla Hyde had explained the prenup to me in terms that made it sound protective for both parties, emphasizing how it would prevent either of us from making claims on the other's career achievements if our marriage ended. She never mentioned that stock options granted during marriage would be considered separate property under the agreement, or that the appreciation of those assets would remain entirely mine regardless of how much marital funds were used to support our lifestyle. Jules had sat beside me during that consultation, holding my hand and nodding supportively, while Camilla explained each clause, occasionally interjecting comments about how this was just protecting both of our interests and ensuring that money would never be an issue between us. The signing ceremony had been orchestrated to feel romantic rather than legal, with Jules arranging for champagne and flowers, framing it as the last step before becoming husband and wife. She had cried when I hesitated, asking why I was making such a big deal about something that was just paperwork, why I didn't trust her enough to sign something that protected both of us equally. "If you loved me, you wouldn't question this," she had said, through tears. "This is about starting our marriage with complete honesty and trust." The emotional manipulation was subtle but effective, making me feel like refusing to sign would be proof that I didn't believe in our relationship. During the 3 months I spent gathering evidence of Jules's affair, I also discovered that she had been documenting our lifestyle and my Tesla holdings in ways that suggested she was building a case for financial support. She had screenshots of my stock portfolio performance, photos of expensive items I had purchased, and detailed records of our monthly expenses. Her notes app contained calculations about potential alimony claims and research about spousal support in high net worth divorces. Most disturbing was a voice memo where she practiced explaining to a lawyer how she had sacrificed her career growth to support her husband's demanding job, and deserved compensation for her lost earning potential. The final piece of evidence came when I hired a private investigator, something I never thought I would do, but felt necessary given the scope of Jules's deception. The investigator confirmed that Jules and Lachlan had been planning a future together, with Lachlan already introducing Jules to his friends and colleagues as his girlfriend. They had looked at apartments together, discussed travel plans for after Jules's divorce was finalized, and Lachlan had even given Jules a promise ring that she wore on a chain around her neck, hidden under her clothes. The investigator's report included photos of them together at restaurants and hotels, timestamps that corresponded exactly with Jules' supposed yoga classes and brand meetings. Armed with this evidence, I consulted with Nico Tran, a divorce attorney who specialized in high-asset cases involving technology industry professionals. Nico reviewed the prenup with fresh eyes and immediately identified several problems with how it had been executed. "Your wife had legal representation during the prenup negotiation, but you didn't," he explained during our first meeting. "That creates a presumption of duress and unconscionability. Additionally, the asset disclosure was incomplete because Tesla stock options weren't properly valued at the time of signing." Nico believed we had grounds to challenge the prenup's validity, especially given the evidence of Jules's strategic planning and the timing of her sudden interest in marriage. The Tesla stock had continued its incredible run throughout 2024, reaching levels that made my total holdings worth over $15 million by the time I filed for divorce in January 2025. Jules's reaction to being served papers was immediate and confident, texting me within hours to remind me that the prenup protects everything, and that I would be responsible for paying her legal fees since I was the one initiating the divorce. She hired Camilla Hyde again, the same attorney who had drafted our prenup, clearly believing that their previous work together would ensure a quick and favorable outcome. Jules even posted on Instagram about going through a difficult time and asking for her followers' support, presenting herself as the victim of an unexpected divorce while carefully avoiding any mention of her relationship with Lachlan. What Jules didn't know was that Nico had spent weeks preparing for this case, researching precedents for challenging prenups in technology industry divorces and building a strategy around the specific circumstances of our marriage. The discovery phase would reveal Jules's affair, her strategic planning, and her deliberate deception about the true nature of our relationship. More importantly, it would expose the fact that the Tesla stock options granted during our marriage were worth exponentially more than anyone had calculated when the prenup was signed, creating a community property claim that could override the prenuptial agreement's protections. The discovery phase of our divorce proceedings began in February 2025, and Jules's confidence started showing cracks almost immediately when Nico requested comprehensive financial records and communications. She had assumed that the prenup would make the process straightforward with minimal investigation into our assets or the circumstances of our marriage breakdown. Instead, Nico subpoenaed her phone records, social media accounts, and financial transactions going back 2 years, painting a detailed picture of her relationship with Lachlan Pierce and her strategic planning for our divorce. Jules's initial response was defiant, posting cryptic Instagram stories about fighting for what you deserve and not letting anyone intimidate you. But privately, she was panicking about what the investigation might reveal. The phone records were devastating to Jules's credibility. They showed over 3,000 text messages and hundreds of hours of calls between her and Lachlan dating back to September 2024, directly contradicting her claims that their relationship had only become romantic after our separation. The timing was particularly damning because it coincided exactly with when Jules had started researching divorce lawyers and prenuptial agreement challenges. Nico presented a timeline showing that Jules's first consultation with a different divorce attorney happened just 2 weeks after her first extended phone conversation with Lachlan, suggesting that her affair had directly motivated her exit strategy from our marriage. The financial records revealed the true scope of Jules's lifestyle inflation and how it correlated with my Tesla stock appreciation. Between 2022 and 2024, her personal spending had increased by 400%, even though her influencer income had only grown by 60% during the same period. The additional spending was entirely funded by my Tesla earnings, which she had been tracking meticulously through our shared financial management app. Nico found spreadsheets on Jules's laptop where she had calculated my net worth month by month, including projections for future stock vesting and potential Tesla stock splits. These calculations were used to justify her increasing expenditures and were shared with Lachlan during their discussions about her post-divorce financial security. The most damaging evidence came from Jules's communications with Delilah Knox, which revealed the calculated nature of her approach to our marriage and divorce. In messages dating back over a year, Jules had described me as her tech ATM and discussed strategies for maximizing her settlement while minimizing her exposure to any marital debt. The prenup protects me from having to give him anything, she had written to Delilah, but I need to figure out how to claim some of his Tesla money since I supported his career. These messages directly contradicted her public statements about being blindsided by our divorce and painted her as someone who had been planning her exit for months. Camilla Hyde's confidence began wavering when Nico presented evidence that Jules had been receiving legal advice about challenging the prenup's effectiveness even before filing for divorce. Jules had consulted with 3 different attorneys in late 2024, specifically asking about scenarios where a prenup might be invalidated and how appreciation of premarital assets could be claimed as community property. One attorney had advised her that California courts sometimes awarded spousal support based on lifestyle maintenance, regardless of prenuptial agreements, especially in cases where one spouse had sacrificed career advancement to support the other's success. The investigation into our prenup revealed serious procedural flaws that Nico believed would invalidate the entire agreement. Jules had been represented by Camilla Hyde, who was a family friend and had known Jules since childhood, creating a conflict of interest that hadn't been properly disclosed during our prenup negotiations. Additionally, the asset disclosure I had provided was based on Tesla stock valuations from 2019, when the shares were worth $300 each. But by our wedding date in 2020, they had already appreciated to over $800 per share. This misrepresentation of asset values, combined with my lack of independent legal counsel, created grounds for challenging the prenup's enforceability. The Tesla stock situation was more complex than either Jules or I had understood when we signed our prenup. While my premarital options were clearly separate property, the stock grants I received during our marriage existed in a legal gray area. Nico's research revealed that California courts had ruled inconsistently on whether stock options granted during marriage, but based on premarital employment, were separate or community property. The key factor was often whether the options were compensation for future work or recognition of past performance, and my Tesla grants fell into both categories depending on their specific terms and vesting schedules. By March 2025, the Tesla stock had continued its unprecedented climb, reaching levels that pushed my total holdings to over $18 million. This appreciation was happening in real time during our divorce proceedings, creating additional complexity around asset valuation and division. Jules's social media presence began reflecting her growing desperation, with posts about staying strong during difficult times and fighting for your worth, though she continued maintaining the fiction that our divorce was amicable and mutual. Her follower engagement was declining as people began speculating about the real reasons behind our separation, especially after gossip blogs picked up rumors about her relationship with Lachlan. Lachlan Pierce himself became a complicating factor when Nico's investigation revealed that he had been advising Jules on financial strategy throughout their affair. As an investment banker, Lachlan understood asset valuation and had been helping Jules calculate potential settlement amounts based on different scenarios for dividing my Tesla holdings. His involvement transformed what might have been a simple case of adultery into a more serious allegation of conspiracy to defraud, since he had been providing professional financial advice to help Jules maximize her divorce settlement while concealing their romantic relationship. The depositions were scheduled for April 2025, and Camilla Hyde's preparation strategy revealed just how much Jules's case had deteriorated. Instead of relying on the prenup's protections, they were now arguing that Jules deserved compensation for supporting my career during Tesla's critical growth period, and that she had sacrificed her own earning potential to maintain our lifestyle and social obligations. This argument required proving that her influencer career had suffered because of our marriage, which was contradicted by her own social media content showing how she had leveraged our relationship and lifestyle for content creation and brand partnerships. Jules' deposition was scheduled first, and her preparation sessions with Camilla became increasingly tense as the strength of Nico's evidence became clear. I could hear them arguing through the conference room walls during one of their meetings, with Jules insisting that the prenup should protect her, and Camilla explaining that the procedural flaws and evidence of strategic planning had fundamentally changed their legal position. Jules's confidence was finally cracking as she realized that her careful planning might backfire spectacularly, potentially leaving her with nothing while facing legal exposure for her deceptive conduct during our marriage. The week before depositions began, Jules made one final attempt to control the narrative by posting a lengthy Instagram statement about toxic relationships and financial abuse, carefully crafted to position herself as a victim while avoiding any specific claims that could be used against her in court. The post received thousands of supportive comments from followers who believed her carefully constructed version of events, but it also prompted several gossip blogs to investigate further, leading to paparazzi photos of Jules and Lachlan together that definitively proved their relationship had begun well before our separation. These photos would become crucial evidence in demonstrating that Jules's claims about the timeline of our marriage breakdown were false, undermining her credibility on every other issue in our case. The depositions in April 2025 were brutal for Jules, as Nico systematically dismantled every aspect of her carefully constructed narrative about our marriage and its breakdown. Under oath, Jules was forced to admit that she had been in communication with Lachlan Pierce for months before our separation, that she had consulted multiple divorce attorneys while still posting anniversary tributes on social media, and that she had been tracking my Tesla stock performance through our shared financial apps. Her answers became increasingly evasive as Nico presented evidence of her strategic planning, and by the end of her 8-hour deposition, even Camilla Hyde looked defeated. Jules left the law office in tears, her confidence completely shattered as she realized that her prenup might not provide the protection she had counted on for years. My own deposition was significantly shorter and more straightforward, focusing on my work at Tesla, the timeline of my stock grants, and my genuine surprise at discovering Jules's affair and exit planning. Nico had prepared me to discuss the emotional manipulation I had experienced during our prenup negotiations, the pressure Jules had applied to sign without independent counsel, and my complete ignorance of her relationship with Lachlan until the Apple Watch notifications revealed the truth. The contrast between my straightforward answers and Jules' evasiveness would be stark when presented to the court, reinforcing the narrative that I had been the honest party in our marriage while Jules had been calculating and deceptive. The media attention began building in May 2025, when gossip blogs started covering our divorce after paparazzi photos surfaced of Jules and Lachlan at expensive restaurants and luxury hotels. Jules' carefully maintained image as a successful influencer in a loving marriage crumbled as details of the affair became public knowledge. Her Instagram comment sections filled with questions about Lachlan and criticism of her dishonesty, while several brand partners quietly ended their relationships with her to avoid association with the scandal. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same social media presence Jules had used to monetize our marriage was now destroying her credibility and earning potential. Camilla Hyde's strategy shifted dramatically as the court date approached, moving away from relying on the prenup's protections toward arguing that Jules deserved spousal support based on lifestyle maintenance and career sacrifice. This new approach required proving that Jules had given up lucrative opportunities to support my career, but the evidence showed the opposite. Her influencer income and follower count had grown consistently throughout our marriage, largely due to content featuring our lifestyle, funded by my Tesla earnings. Nico had compiled a detailed analysis showing that Jules's career had actually benefited from our marriage, not suffered, making any claims of financial sacrifice impossible to substantiate. The Tesla stock continued its remarkable performance throughout the spring of 2025, pushing my total holdings past $18 million by the time our court date was scheduled for June. This ongoing appreciation created additional urgency for Jules, who was watching potential settlement amounts increase daily while her own financial situation deteriorated. Lachlan had grown distant as the negative publicity intensified, and Jules was struggling to maintain her expensive lifestyle without the support of my income. Her credit card statements showed mounting debt and increasingly desperate attempts to maintain appearances, while her influencer income declined due to lost sponsorships and reduced engagement. Jules's social media strategy became increasingly erratic as the court date approached, swinging between victim narratives and defiant posts about fighting for what you deserve. She hired a public relations consultant to help manage her image, but the consultant's efforts were undermined by continuous leaks of court documents and new evidence of her affair with Lachlan. The contrast between her carefully curated Instagram presence and the reality revealed in court filings created a cognitive dissonance that her followers couldn't ignore, leading to a steady decline in her audience and engagement rates. Nico's preparation for trial was meticulous, focusing on 3 key arguments that would undermine Jules's case completely. First, the prenup was invalid due to procedural flaws, inadequate disclosure, and my lack of independent counsel. Second, Jules's affair and strategic planning demonstrated bad faith that should disqualify her from receiving any marital assets or support. Third, the Tesla stock appreciation during our marriage created community property rights that superseded any prenuptial agreement, especially given Jules's role in spending the income that allowed me to hold the stock rather than selling it for living expenses. The week before trial, Camilla Hyde made a settlement offer that revealed just how desperate Jules' situation had become. Instead of demanding half of my Tesla holdings based on community property rights, she was now asking for $500,000 in cash and 3 years of spousal support, essentially acknowledging that the prenup challenges and affair evidence had destroyed Jules's negotiating position. Nico advised me to reject the offer, confident that we could prove Jules deserved nothing beyond her separate property and potentially faced liability for legal fees due to her fraudulent conduct during our marriage. Jules's final attempt to control the narrative came through a podcast interview with a popular relationship coach, where she discussed financial abuse in marriage and protecting yourself from controlling partner. The interview was carefully scripted to avoid specific claims about our case while painting herself as a victim of manipulation and isolation. However, the podcast host had done research and asked pointed questions about the timeline of Jules's relationship with Lachlan, forcing her to give evasive answers that only reinforced public skepticism about her credibility. The courthouse had heightened security on the morning of our trial due to media interest and Jules's social media following. She arrived dressed in an expensive but conservative outfit, clearly chosen to project sympathy and respectability, accompanied by Camilla Hyde and looking nervous despite her attempts to maintain composure. I wore a simple suit and arrived with Nico, feeling more confident than I had in months as we prepared to present our case. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Jules had spent years building a public image based on our supposedly perfect marriage, and now that same publicity was working against her as the truth about her deception came to light. The jury selection process revealed how much public opinion had shifted against Jules, with several potential jurors expressing familiarity with the case through social media coverage and gossip blogs. Camilla Hyde struggled to find jurors who hadn't formed opinions about Jules's credibility, while Nico was able to seat several individuals who expressed skepticism about social media influencers and prenuptial agreements. The composition of the final jury suggested that Jules's carefully crafted public image might actually work against her, as people who had followed influencer culture were particularly sensitive to authenticity and manipulation. As opening statements began, the courtroom was packed with reporters, legal observers, and some of Jules's remaining supporters who had driven from Los Angeles to show solidarity. Jules maintained her composure during Camilla Hyde's opening, which focused on her role as a supportive wife who had helped build the lifestyle that allowed me to focus on my career at Tesla. However, her facade cracked when Nico began his opening statement, methodically outlining the evidence of her affair, her strategic planning, and her deceptive conduct throughout our marriage. By the time Nico mentioned the $18 million Tesla stock valuation, Jules's confident expression had been replaced by barely concealed panic. The trial's turning point came on the second day, when Nico called his financial expert witness to testify about the current value of my Tesla holdings. Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic accountant who specialized in technology company stock valuations, had calculated my total Tesla assets as of that morning using real-time market data. Jules sat confidently beside Camilla Hyde, clearly expecting the numbers to align with the valuations they had prepared for, which were based on outdated information from several months earlier. Her designer notebook was open to a page showing calculations that assumed my holdings were worth approximately $12 million, the figure that had been discussed during our settlement negotiations. Based on my analysis of Mr. Kwan's Tesla stock grants, option exercises, and current market valuations, Dr. Chen testified, his total Tesla holdings as of this morning are valued at $18.2 million. The words hung in the air like a physical presence, and I watched Jules's face transform from confident expectation to complete shock. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, and she turned to stare at Camilla Hyde with an expression of panic that was visible to everyone in the courtroom. The number was significantly higher than anyone had anticipated, representing a nearly 50% increase over the estimates that had driven all previous settlement discussions and legal strategy. Camilla Hyde's reaction was equally telling, as she frantically shuffled through her papers looking for updated valuations that simply didn't exist. "Your Honor," she stammered, rising from her chair, "I would like to request a brief recess to review these figures with my client." But Nico was ready for this moment, presenting documentation showing that Tesla stock had continued its unprecedented climb throughout our divorce proceedings, driven by new product announcements and expanded manufacturing capacity. The judge denied the recess request, instructing Dr. Chen to continue her testimony about how the stock appreciation affected community property calculation. Jules's composure completely crumbled as Dr. Chen explained that stock options granted during marriage were typically considered community property in California, regardless of prenuptial agreements, especially when the appreciation was due to efforts made during the marriage. Mr. Kwan's continued employment at Tesla during the marriage, combined with his participation in product development and company growth initiative, means that a significant portion of the stock appreciation should be classified as marital assets, Dr. Chen testified. Jules began whispering urgently to Camilla Hyde, her carefully maintained courtroom demeanor dissolving into barely controlled panic. The moment that would define the entire trial came when Nico asked Dr. Chen to calculate the potential community property value of my Tesla holdings. Assuming that 50% of the appreciation during the marriage period constitutes community property, Dr. Chen explained, Mrs. Ashbourne would potentially be entitled to approximately $9.1 million, subject to the court's determination of the prenuptial agreement's validity. Jules's reaction was immediate and explosive. She shot to her feet, her voice rising to a near shriek as she turned toward Camilla Hyde. "You said the prenup protects everything," she yelled, her composure completely shattered. The courtroom erupted as Jules continued her outburst, pointing accusingly at her attorney while her voice grew increasingly hysterical. "You promised me the prenup would protect everything I worked for. You said his stock options didn't matter." Camilla Hyde tried desperately to calm her client, reaching for Jules's arm, but Jules jerked away violently. In her rage and panic, Jules grabbed her designer Hermes purse from the table and hurled it with full force at the courtroom wall. The $4,000 bag hit the mahogany paneling with a loud crash, its contents spilling across the floor as the entire courtroom sat in stunned silence. "Mrs. Ashbourne," the judge's voice cut through the chaos as bailiffs moved toward our table, "you will control yourself in my courtroom, or you will be held in contempt." But Jules was beyond rational thought, staring at the scattered contents of her purse while the reality of her situation fully sank in. The prenup that she had counted on to protect her from any claims on her assets was now completely irrelevant, since she would be the one making claims on mine. The tables had turned so completely that she was looking at potentially receiving the largest divorce settlement in recent California history, but only if she could prove that the prenup was invalid. Camilla Hyde was stammering her own response to the testimony, clearly unprepared for the magnitude of the numbers they were now dealing with. "Your Honor, my client was not aware of the current stock valuation when we prepared our case," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "We would respectfully request additional time to review our strategy in light of this new information." The admission that they had been operating with outdated financial information undermined every argument they had made about Jules's financial needs and settlement expectations, while highlighting their failure to properly prepare for trial. The judge's response was sharp and immediate. "Counselor, it is your responsibility to have current financial information before appearing in my courtroom. The fact that Tesla stock has appreciated significantly is not new information. It is publicly available market data that should have been part of your preparation." Jules slumped back into her chair, her face pale and her hands shaking as she realized that her careful planning had backfired spectacularly. Instead of protecting herself from my claims, she was now facing the possibility of receiving millions of dollars she had never expected, but only if she could overcome the very prenup she had insisted on signing. The irony of the situation was overwhelming. Jules had spent years confident that the prenup would protect her from any financial obligations to me, never imagining that it would become the primary obstacle to her claiming the largest portion of an $18 million windfall. Her social media posts about the prenup protecting everything she had worked for would now be evidence against her own interests, since she would need to prove that the agreement was invalid in order to claim community property rights to my Tesla holdings. Nico seized the moment to present additional evidence about Jules's affair and strategic planning, arguing that her deceptive conduct should disqualify her from receiving any marital assets regardless of the prenup's validity. Mrs. Ashbourne spent months planning her exit from this marriage while continuing to benefit from Mr. Kwan's earnings, he told the court. She cannot now claim to be entitled to the very assets she attempted to hide from and manipulate. The combination of her courtroom outburst and the evidence of her calculated deception created a devastating picture of someone whose greed had ultimately undermined her own interests. As court recessed for the day, Jules sat motionless at the defense table while Camilla Hyde gathered her papers with shaking hands. The media representatives in the gallery were already typing on their phones, preparing stories about the dramatic courtroom scene and the staggering dollar amounts involved. Jules' carefully constructed public image had been completely destroyed in a matter of minutes, replaced by the image of someone who had thrown an expensive purse at a courtroom wall while screaming at her own attorney. The video clips would be all over social media within hours, providing the final blow to whatever remained of her influencer career and public credibility. The judge's final ruling came 3 weeks after Jules's courtroom meltdown, and the decision was more comprehensive than either side had anticipated. Judge Patricia Morrison not only invalidated our prenuptial agreement due to procedural flaws and inadequate disclosure, but also awarded me sole ownership of all Tesla stock based on Jules's fraudulent conduct during our marriage. The evidence clearly demonstrates that Mrs. Ashbourne engaged in systematic deception while planning her exit strategy, Judge Morrison stated in her written opinion. Such conduct precludes any claim to marital assets, regardless of community property laws. Jules received only her separate property from before our marriage, minus attorney fees and court costs, leaving her with approximately $150,000 in mounting debt from her lifestyle inflation during our divorce proceedings. The media coverage of our case became a cautionary tale about prenuptial agreements and social media relationships, with legal experts analyzing how Jules's confidence in her prenup had blinded her to the potential value of my Tesla holdings. Her final Instagram post was a generic statement about moving forward and learning from difficult experiences, but the comments section was filled with criticism and mockery from followers who felt deceived by her carefully curated marriage content. Within 6 months of our divorce being finalized, Jules had lost over 300,000 followers and virtually all of her brand partnerships, forcing her to sell her luxury car and move back in with her parents in suburban Chicago. Lachlan Pierce disappeared from Jules' life completely once the trial ended, and the true scope of her financial situation became clear. The investment banker who had promised to support her through the divorce process was nowhere to be found when she needed help with basic living expenses, having apparently been more interested in the lifestyle she represented than in Jules herself. His abandonment was swift and brutal, with mutual friends reporting that he blocked her number and refused to take her calls after learning that she wouldn't be receiving the multi-million-dollar settlement they had both anticipated. My own recovery from the marriage took longer than I expected, despite the favorable legal outcome. The betrayal and manipulation I had experienced left me cautious about relationships and deeply skeptical of anyone who showed interest in my Tesla wealth. I took a 6-month sabbatical from work to focus on therapy and rebuilding my sense of self outside of Jules's constant criticism and control. The money that had caused so much conflict in our marriage became a tool for positive change as I established a foundation focused on financial literacy education for young adults, ensuring that others wouldn't face the same manipulation I had experienced. Mira and I rebuilt our relationship during this period, with my sister providing the emotional support I had been missing throughout my marriage to Jules. I knew she was trouble from the beginning, Mira admitted during one of our weekly dinners. But I also knew you had to figure it out for yourself. I'm just glad you found the strength to fight back. Her validation meant more to me than any court victory, confirming that my instincts about Jules's behavior had been accurate and that the gaslighting I had experienced was real and damaging. The Tesla stock continued its incredible performance throughout 2025, eventually reaching levels that pushed my total holdings above $25 million by year's end. The appreciation felt almost surreal, representing more wealth than I had ever imagined possible when I first joined the company in 2018. But unlike during my marriage, when the money had been a source of stress and manipulation, I now viewed it as an opportunity to build something meaningful and lasting, free from the pressure to fund someone else's performative lifestyle. Jules's attempts to restart her influencer career were unsuccessful, as her audience had moved on to other content creators who seemed more authentic and relatable. Her posts about new beginnings and finding yourself after heartbreak felt hollow and calculated, lacking the engagement and authenticity that had originally built her following. Several gossip blogs continued covering her struggles, but the attention was negative and focused on her fall from grace rather than any comeback story. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same social media presence she had used to monetize our marriage had become a liability in her attempts to rebuild her life. Camilla Hyde faced professional consequences for her handling of our case, with the state bar investigating her representation of Jules due to conflicts of interest and inadequate preparation. The investigation revealed that Camilla had failed to properly research the potential value of Tesla stock options and had given Jules unrealistic expectations about the prenup's protections. While she wasn't disbarred, the public nature of our case damaged her reputation and led to several clients seeking different representation for their own high-asset divorces. I eventually began dating again, meeting Dr. Rachel Kim through a book club focused on financial independence and ethical investing. Rachel was a psychology professor who had no interest in luxury brands or social media validation, instead sharing my values about using wealth responsibly and building genuine connections based on mutual respect. Our relationship developed slowly and authentically, without the performative elements that had characterized my marriage to Jules. Rachel's genuine curiosity about my work at Tesla and her own financial independence created a foundation of trust that I had never experienced with Jules. The foundation I established grew into a significant initiative, providing financial literacy workshops and resources to college students and young professionals entering the technology industry. Many of the people we helped were in situations similar to what mine had been, with valuable stock options they didn't fully understand, and partners who might not have their best interests at heart. The work felt meaningful in a way that transcended the money involved, representing a positive legacy built from the ashes of my failed marriage. 2 years after our divorce was finalized, I received a brief email from Jules, asking if we could meet for coffee to discuss making amends and closure. The message felt calculated rather than sincere, and I chose not to respond. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that she was working as a social media manager for a small marketing firm, a far cry from her previous aspirations of influencer stardom. Her requests for reconciliation felt more about accessing my continued success than about genuine remorse for her actions during our marriage. The house that Rachel and I eventually bought together was modest by my current financial standards, a comfortable craftsman in a quiet neighborhood that felt like home rather than a stage for content creation. We furnished it with pieces we both loved rather than items chosen for their appearance on social media, creating a space that reflected our actual values and preferences. The contrast with my life with Jules was stark, highlighting how much of our relationship had been performance rather than genuine partnership. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that Jules's abandonment of me through her affair and deception had actually been a gift, freeing me from a relationship built on manipulation and false pretenses. The prenup that she had insisted would protect her had ultimately protected me from her financial claims, while the Tesla stock she had mocked as a boring tech job became the foundation for genuine financial independence and meaningful work. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead us toward the life we were meant to live, and sometimes the people who try to use us end up giving us exactly what we need to find our true path forward. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone's attempt to manipulate you ultimately backfired and led to something better for your life? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if my journey resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about overcoming deception and finding genuine success. Remember, the people who truly value you will never try to trick you into giving up your rights or your dreams. Thank you for following my story, and I hope it helps you recognize and avoid similar manipulation in your own relationships.